A historic, fiery first debate is one for the record books, and now Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton are both back on the road again. Hello, everybody. I'm Jenna Lee, and back with us today, John Scott. Lucky to have you.
Back from vacation, and we have a debate to warm up with. I am John Scott. Hours after facing off on for the first time, the two candidates head back to the swing states, which will decide this election, of course. Donald Trump campaigning in Florida today. Hillary Clinton is in North Carolina. As the battleground state polls keep getting tighter, each candidate wants to tap some momentum from last night's big event. A debate that began with smiles and handshakes, but quickly turned into an acerbic exchange of very sharp attacks.
Donald was one of the people who rooted for the housing crisis. He said back in 2006, gee, I hope it does collapse because then I can go in and buy some and make some money. Well, it did collapse.
That's called business, by the way. And Hillary, I just ask you this. You've been doing this for 30 years. Why are you just thinking about these solutions right now? For 30 years you've been doing it, and now you're just starting to think of solutions. I will release my tax returns against my lawyer's wishes when she releases her 33,000 emails that have been deleted. As soon as she releases them, I will release.
So you've got to ask yourself, why won't he release his tax returns? And I think there may be a couple of reasons. First, maybe he's not as rich as he says he is. Or maybe he doesn't want the American people, all of you watching tonight, to know that he's paid nothing in federal taxes.
Our country has tremendous problems. We're a debtor nation, we're a serious debtor nation, and we have a country that needs new roads, new tunnels, new bridges, new airports, new schools, new hospitals. And we don't have the money because it's been squandered on so many of your ideas.
And maybe because you haven't paid any federal income tax for a lot of years.
And I think I did a great job and a great service, not only for the country, but even for the president, in getting him to produce his birth certificate.
Secretary Clinton.
He has really started his political activity based on this racist lie that our first black president was not an American citizen. Well, I hope the fact checkers are turning up the volume and really working hard. Donald supported the invasion of Iraq.
Wrong.
That is absolutely
wrong.
Proved over and over again.
And you look at the Middle East, it's a total mess. Under your direction to a large extent. You started the Iran deal. That's another beauty where you have a country that was ready to fall. I mean, they were doing so badly. They were choking on the sanctions, and now they're going to be actually probably a major power at some point pretty soon, the way they're going.
All right, so let's talk about the aftermath with Carol Lee, White House correspondent for the Wall Street Journal. Carol, good to have you here this morning.
Good to be
High expectations, high ratings, we were told, for this debate. Did it live up to the billing?
Well, it was a very spirited debate. I think it definitely did, and it covered a tremendous bunch of ground, from policies to questions that they each have about each other's character. There weren't any real big knockout moments in the debate, but there were each of them had some base hits, and you know, it's not clear whether Donald Trump, who came into this needing to keep the trend, the polling trend moving in his direction, whether he won any new voters over, particularly women and independents, but he probably didn't lose any voters. Conventional wisdom says that Hillary Clinton won the debate. I think that will bear out in the polling, which we haven't seen yet. But she has already come out and said she's looking forward to the next debate, and clearly the Clinton campaign feels very good about her performance last night.
She spent years in the public eye, giving speeches, doing this kind of thing, also years as an attorney doing this kind of thing. So you might expect that she might do better on the first debate, but I've received emails from lots of viewers who say, I don't care personally, how well Donald Trump does on the debates. That's what we like about him. He's not a traditional politician. If that's the bar, did he meet that bar?
Well, he did not perform in a way a typical politician would. He had some interesting one-liners, I think, that would play to his supporters. He said that she has a lot of experience, but it's bad experience. He tried to cast her as the kind of politician that voters are tired of, and that she said this you know, the kind of politician who says a lot of things but really doesn't do anything. He talked about her being in the spotlight for 30 years and having plenty of opportunity to make the kinds of changes she's now promising to make. I do think, though, one of the interesting things in watching Donald Trump last night was that he is usually the one who's on the attack, and he goes after people's character, and he's very vigorous about that, and he let some opportunities go by. One thing that struck me was that Hillary Clinton was the one who brought up Benghazi, and she did so in kind of an oblique way, saying she testified before Congress for 11 hours, but he let that moment go by, and I found that interesting because that's been one of the things that he's attacked her on the campaign trail for months.
Also missed an opportunity, it seemed, when she brought up Russian hacking into, you know, U.S. government and DNC servers and so forth.
Yeah, he didn't really go after her on the emails, again, which has been not only something that he's criticized her about from the start, but something that voters have really has raised questions for voters of whether or not she's trustworthy. And his main line on that was that her aides are pleading the fifth, when there's a whole other array of ways in which he could have criticized her on that, and he chose this very narrow path. And so, you know, I think that next debate will be very interesting to see what kinds of adjustments he makes, and also how she prepares for what you would think would be some significant adjustments on his part.
But the momentum has been in his direction lately, and I wonder whether, you know, anything that was said by either candidate last night is enough to blunt that momentum.
I mean, that's the big question, and we'll probably have that figured out a little bit and a better picture on that in a few days. I think Donald Trump didn't lose anybody. If you were supporting him, you saw what you wanted to see last night. I think the question is whether he was able to move anybody toward him, particularly women. You know, there were some very pointed moments in the debate about his comments about women. You know, was that effective? It remains to be seen.
He spoke on Fox and Friends this morning by phone about that particular issue. Here's what he had to say. I want to play this for you.
When she hit me at the end with the women, I was going to hit her with her husband's women, and I decided I shouldn't do it because her daughter was in the room.
Is that what you mentioned? You know, I had something I could bring up, but I didn't want to bring it up?
In front of Chelsea.
Yeah, having to do with her husband.
Many people thought that the
all of the women. Yeah, they sort of thought that was it. And I didn't feel comfortable doing it. I think I did the right thing. It's not worth a point. I didn't feel comfortable doing it with Chelsea in the room. I think Chelsea's a fine young lady. I didn't like doing it with Chelsea in the room.
Well, guess what? Chelsea's going to be there for every debate, so that issue might be off the table for him if that's how he feels about it.
Yeah, if that's how he feels about it, but he's kind of, you know, flirting with the idea of raising it, and so it wouldn't be surprising if he did raise that next time. And I think, you know, his supporters expect that from him. Whether or not that plays well with women that he needs to win over to his side, you know, is unclear, because it's not Hillary Clinton who had an affair, it's her husband.
Well, I'm sure you've had a short night. Thanks for getting up and sharing some of your thoughts with us. Carol Lee from the Wall Street Journal. Thank you, Carol. We also want to hear from you. Who do you think won the big debate last night? Our live chat up and running. Go to foxnews.com/happeningnow to join the conversation.
We'll return to more politics in just a moment, but we have a Fox News alert on a developing situation in the heartland of our country, awaiting what could be a flooding disaster in Iowa, with the Cedar Rapids River expected to crest today at a staggering 11 feet above flood stage. A massive effort is underway as the city works to protect thousands of homes from those rising waters, with evacuation orders in effect for entire neighborhoods in the city's low-lying areas. Janice Dean is live at the Fox Extreme Weather Center with more for us now. Janice?
Hi, Jenny. We were talking about this yesterday. So the flooding came last week, but we're still feeling the results of this. Over 10 inches of rainfall in parts of Iowa and Wisconsin. Take a look at the radar precipitation. And of course, the rivers are just cresting now. We're going to be dealing with major flood stage at these rivers until at least Sunday. The past 48 hours look good. Conditions are dry. We're really not going to see any rainfall over the next couple of days, but the damage is done. Here are the river gauge observations. Again, major flooding at the Cedar River, which crested at its second highest in history, 22 feet. So people are going to be still on edge over the next couple of days. The rivers will start to come down over, the next 48 hours, but still at major flood stage in some cases until Sunday. There's your future radar. We have this area of low pressure across the Gulf, or rather the Great Lakes. tax, but not getting into portions of Iowa, which is great news, so people can start to repair and recover from this area that was, just inundated with upwards of 10 inches of rainfall. There's your 5-day forecast real quick. Also want to quickly make mention the potential for this storm system, Jenna. We think it's going to become Matthew, our next named storm. And the tropical models, some of them are showing a hurricane by the weekend moving into the Caribbean. So all interests along the Caribbean, of course, Cuba, Dominican Republic, the East Coast, and the Gulf of Mexico need to watch Matthew. It might not be as well behaved as my son Matthew. So we'll just put that out there.
That's good. It's good context for us to understanding that. Janice, thank you very much.
Of course.
I wonder if Janice submitted that name, because that's how they get the names for the storms.
Interesting. If we see Theodore as well, then we know it's really a fixed system.
We are just getting started here on America's election headquarters. After last night's debate, Hillary Clinton is heading to the swing state of North Carolina. That's where President Obama made his first campaign appearance with Mrs. Clinton back in July. But new polls show the race is getting tighter there with just weeks to go. We'll take a look at the numbers. Also, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump each laid out their vision for taxes in America. We'll break down those plans next. First, here's Hillary Clinton hitting Trump regarding his wealth.
Donald was very fortunate in his life, and that's all to his benefit. He started his business with $14 million borrowed from his father, and he really believes that the more you help wealthy people, the better off we'll be, and that everything will work out from there.
Under my plan, I'll be reducing taxes tremendously, from 35% to 15% for companies, small and big businesses. That's going to be a job creator like we haven't seen since Ronald Reagan. It's going to be a beautiful thing to watch.
The kind of plan that Donald has put forth would be trickle-down economics all over again. In fact, it would be the most extreme version, the biggest tax cuts for the top percent of the people in this country that we've ever had. I call it trumped up trickle down, because that's exactly what it would be. That is not how we grow the economy.
Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump sparring over taxes and how best to stimulate the economy. Clinton wants to raise taxes for the wealthiest Americans and close loopholes for corporations, while Trump wants to lower taxes across the board. And economists can't seem to agree on which is the better path. Austin Goolsbee is an economics professor at the University of Chicago, former chairman of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, and we should mention an advisor to Hillary Clinton. Peter Navarro is an economics professor at the University of California and a policy advisor to Donald Trump. It's nice to have you both. Let me just start off with a question to both of you as we take a look at our economy. Right now we're in debt. Our economy is growing, but it's not gangbusters. Our job market is okay, but both sides say it could be better. What new ideas is either candidate really presenting that will change our economy and bring it to a new age, if you will? Austin, what new ideas does Hillary Clinton have?
Well, I thought the two main parts of her economic idea on the investment side, she wants to raise taxes on high-income people and use the money to improve the education system, make college more affordable, and get debt-free college for millions of Americans, and invest in the biggest infrastructure investment in good jobs since Eisenhower. I'd say those are two new ideas.
Like a new idea. Peter, what from Donald Trump is new?
Well, I mean, look, Hillary Clinton wants to raise taxes on business and let the government invest in high-risk ventures. That's not new. That's just stupid.
Okay, but what about Donald Trump?
What Donald Trump wants to do is a four-point thing. Basically, cut taxes. That gets growth. Cut regulation. That gets growth. Unleash our energy sector. That gets growth. And balance our trade deficit. That gets growth. So everything Donald Trump is doing works integrated, synergistically, pushes us to 3.5% growth. We've been stuck for 15 years now below 2% growth, and it's under the last 8 years, Mr. Obama has doubled our debt to $20 trillion. If you look at Hillary Clinton's plan, It points in the opposite direction.
Okay,
Everything she wants to do,
it points in the opposite.
In the opposite direction. Raise taxes, increase regulation.
Okay, hold on a second. The reason why I'm asking you both this question is that we heard, both candidates had very typical answers for Democrat or Republican, either to cut taxes or raise taxes, and we've all heard that before. And so my question really is about whether or not either would produce a different result and our economy would be better.
Jenny,
hold on one second, Peter. Peter said quite a bit about the fact that Donald Trump's plan would be more pro-growth. Why do you think Hillary Clinton's plan would be more pro-growth?
I believe Hillary Clinton's plan is more pro-growth because where growth comes from is having good people with good skills and having public infrastructure as a backdrop. If you think that low corporate taxes are what generates growth, then what do you say to the fact that the lowest corporate tax rate in the world is in Turkmenistan and the second lowest is in Bosnia-Herzegovina?
And the highest
so if this is the magic elixir,
okay, so Peter, respond to that, because
what
Austin is pointing out is that if you look at the places with the lowest tax rates for companies, you're not seeing gangbuster economies there. So respond to that.
Turkmenistan, that's like stupid too. It's like 35% corporate tax rate here in America, and everybody else is down in the 20s. Germany, France, Japan, South Korea, everyone
where their growth rates are lower than ours.
Tax rates than we do. And the idea, look, this infrastructure thing with Hillary, let's make it clear. She wants to tax business, which is anti-growth. She wants to create an infrastructure bank and a highly leveraged structure. What she's doing is introducing subprime lending. And I'll tell you what, college people graduating now with degrees, got the skills, don't have the opportunity. That's the problem with this economy, and infrastructure spending on subprime lending is not going to solve it.
Let me just switch this conversation a little bit. Donald Trump talked about debt. Austin, I'll let you respond to this first. But I would play a little sound talking about our national debt that regardless of who gets the White House, they're going to have to deal with. Let's go ahead and run the sound.
It's about time that this country had somebody running it that has an idea about money. When we have $20 trillion in debt and our country's a mess, it's one thing to have $20 trillion in debt and our roads are good and our bridges are good and everything's in great shape. Our airports are like from a third world country.
Austin, I would like you to address that specifically because as a real estate developer, Donald Trump is going to have to be somebody that knows how to use debt. That's what real estate developing is. You use debt to develop, and obviously he's doing that somewhat. So why wouldn't he have the skill set to handle that big of a problem?
Well, you see in that answer, he's all over the map. He's actually calling for an infrastructure program while at the same time condemning an infrastructure program. He's saying there's too much debt while he himself proposed a tax plan which will almost double the deficit over the next 10 years. It was just content-free. It was confused and self-contradictory.
Peter, take that on because that's what's being said about Donald Trump's tax plan, that it will add only more debt and not necessarily grow the economy as much.
I disagree with Donald Trump as being the king of debt. The king of debt is Barack Obama and Austin Goolsbee. Austin was in the White House. It took us 230 years to get $10 trillion of debt, and Barack Obama doubled it to 20 in 8 years. What Donald Trump wants to do, all this debt discussion, it's like, oh, we're either going to raise taxes or cut spending to solve the debt crisis. No, no, no. What you do is you double the growth rate and you generate trillions of dollars of revenues and millions of jobs. And that's what Donald Trump is bringing, a different mindset.
Magic beanstalk beans is exactly his plan.
As you're both talking, our viewers are just seeing the debt clock run. So
and it's on Austin Goolsbee's watch and Barack Obama's
Magic beanstalk beans,
quite frankly, both parties are in office will require $20 trillion of debt. I'd love to have you both back to talk more about it. Peter, Austin, great to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so both candidates were asked last night if they would support the eventual winner of the presidential election. Our next guest has been correctly predicting the winner more than 30 years. His choice ahead.
You have to judge us. Who can shoulder the immense, awesome responsibilities of the presidency? Who can put into action the plans that will make your life better?
Hillary Clinton calling on American voters to consider who can best handle the presidency. Our next guest has been weighing that question for decades. And since 1984, he has correctly picked the winner of every presidential election. Now his forecast is America will vote Trump. Here now, Alan Lichtman, an American University professor of history. So, Professor, we read your article in the Washington Post just recently. This was your prediction, but that article is old, and that was before the debate. And I'm curious if anything has transpired over the last few hours that have changed your prediction.
It certainly has hedged it even more. In the Washington Post article, I said, look, the verdict of history, which is what my keys are based on, indicates that this is a year in which the White House party, the Democrats, should lose. But I also noted in that Washington Post piece that I've hedged my prediction for the first time in more than 30 years, saying that in Donald Trump, we might have a history-shattering candidate who could change patterns that have held since 1860 in this country and have enabled me to correctly predict every election since 1984. And we saw some of those patterns on display in the debate. We saw a candidate who had a lot of trouble with truth, even challenging the moderator when the moderator pointed out, indeed, he was not against the Iraq war before it started. We saw him demeaning women by challenging the stamina of Hillary Clinton. We saw him again being the only candidate in many decades to refuse to release his tax returns. And we saw a candidate who seemed to lack the basic knowledge and temperament to be commander-in-chief. So what makes this election so fascinating is we have two competing historical forces. On the one hand, there should be a change election. We should get a Republican president. But on the other hand, we have a candidate who could shatter patterns of history because of his unique status, which we saw on display last night. And we've seen throughout this campaign with statements like he's made
really interesting. I don't mean to interrupt you, but that's interesting. The list that you mentioned are all things that we've discussed before in relation to Donald Trump. And so one wonders if we saw anything new last night that could change the trajectory. We don't know that yet. Let me ask you about your mythology. Going back to 1860, talk to our viewers about the list you created of true and false statements and how that's helped you predict the presidency.
Absolutely. I'm the world's only predicting historian. Historians usually, write about people and talk about people who are already dead. I don't do that. But I did that for developing my system. I developed it in 1981 by looking at every presidential election from 1860 when Lincoln won to 1980 when Reagan won, guided by the theory that presidential elections are primarily judgments on the performance of the party holding the White House. And from that study, I developed 13 true-false questions, which gauge primarily the strength and performance of the party holding the White House. And I developed a decision rule. These are true-false questions where an answer of true always favors the White House party. And the decision rule is if 6 or more of those 13 keys are false, the White House party is predicted to lose. And right now, the Democrats have exactly 6 keys counted against them. That's historical force number one.
Will you change your prediction as we get closer to Election Day? Because as I look down the list, for example, social unrest is number 8. And you say there is no sustained social unrest during the term. That could be true or false. If there is great social unrest that happens over the next several weeks, could something like that change your prediction completely, regardless of what either candidate do?
Great question, because I'm looking at fundamentals like social unrest, the economy, foreign policy, and 3 things can change. You put your finger on one, which would be another count against the Democrats, but correspondingly, one of the things that counts against the Democrats right now that could change is this tremendous surge in voting for Gary Johnson. That's bad for the party in power. He could fade away, and in addition, I do not give the party in power a major foreign policy triumph. It's possible, though, that if they succeed in driving ISIS out of Iraq before the election, and depending on how that is sold and how that is received, that could flip that key back in favor of the Democrats. So this is the most fluid political year, frankly, in the modern history of the country. And that's why you see this crazy polling.
And you say it's one of the most fascinating times for you, for someone that's looked at so many different elections.
Absolutely right.
Professor, it's great to have you on the program. We look forward to having you back. Let's check in and see what it looks like in the next couple of weeks. We'd love to have your assessment as things go closer to voting day. It's great to have you, Professor. Thank you.
Great to be on, and you know where to find me.
Of course, it all comes down to the individual states, and new polls from North Carolina show an incredibly close race in that battleground. Why our next guest says voter interest is particularly high this year in North Carolina as the Democratic presidential nominee heads there to campaign today. Plus, fiery exchanges between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton at their very first face-off, with Trump bringing up her email controversy. But did he hit her hard enough on it? A fair and balanced debate next.
You know, I made a mistake using a private email.
That's for sure.
He also raised the issue of your emails. Do you want to respond to that?
I do. You know, I made a mistake using a private email.
That's for sure.
And if I had to do it over again, I would obviously do it differently. But I'm not going to make any excuses. It was a mistake, and I take responsibility for that.
Mr. Trump?
That was more than a mistake. That was done purposely. Okay, that was not a mistake. That was done purposely. When you have your staff taking the Fifth Amendment, taking the Fifth, so they're not prosecuted. When you have the man that set up the illegal server taking the Fifth, I think it's disgraceful. And believe me, this country thinks it's disgraceful. It really thinks it's disgraceful also.
There's Donald Trump hitting Hillary Clinton on the email controversy last night. Did he go far enough? And who scored the best shots against the other candidate? Let's get an assessment now from Guy Benson, political editor at townhall.com and a Fox News contributor. Jessica Ehrlich, also with us, former Democratic congressional candidate. Welcome to both of you.
Hi.
All right, so Guy,
good morning.
What do you think? The email question came up. A lot of observers have said that Donald Trump had a lot more to work with there that he didn't really use. What's your assessment?
I agree with that. There were a lot of missed opportunities, I think, for Donald Trump last night, not just on the emails, but the Clinton Foundation, which he never raised, Benghazi, which he never raised, her deplorables comment, which he never raised. But on the emails, I actually think the clip that you just played was one of his better moments, because Mrs. Clinton went through and said, oh, well, I'm sorry, it was a mistake. I take responsibility. I won't make excuses. The fact of the matter is, as he said, it was not a mistake. It was deliberate. She has done nothing but make excuses, almost all of which have been proven to be lies. And the responsibility statement is just a sentence. It's meaningless, empty words, because she has not been accountable whatsoever and has held no one accountable, and neither have authorities, apparently. So I think that there was a plenty of opportunities there, even just within that one answer, to pound away at the deletions of the emails, the multiple lies that she has told, and he sort of partially whiffed on it.
From the Democratic perspective, Jessica, give us your take on that particular exchange on the emails.
Well, certainly we've seen various attacks by Trump surrogates over and over again, and even by, him when he's at various rallies or, in interviews, where he was certainly more coherent, more precise in his attacks and arguments. I think he hit on some of his key points, but it goes to his overall performance in this debate, is that, he was out campaigning and, out with the people, which is what he said he wanted to be doing. But the practice that it takes to deliver a 90-minute mano-a-mano debate that's really policy-driven and hitting on issues and being able to turn that and give a coherent argument wasn't what we saw from him. Now, we might see something different when we go into a town hall setting where he's more involved and engaged with the actual, members of the audience. But certainly, I don't think anyone, including Donald Trump himself, were very pleased with his performance last night. For someone like myself, as white college-educated woman, I totally missed his message last night, and I've heard from Trump supporters that that's the point. I'm not his audience. Well, I think that's a little bit part of the issue last night. He needs to reach out to middle-class educated women and to minorities, Hispanics and African Americans in particular, to make sure that even though his poll numbers are rising, that he can crest that wave and get into the White House. And certainly last night did not help him get there.
Some of his supporters and Trump himself are saying that Lester Holt was not exactly fair as moderator last night. Listen to what he said on Fox and Friends.
Well, he didn't ask her about the emails at all. He didn't ask her about her scandals. He didn't ask her about the Benghazi deal that she destroyed. He didn't ask her about a lot of things that she should have been asked about. I mean, you know, there's no question about it.
Why do you think that is?
About her foundation. Why? I don't know. I mean, you know, I didn't think he did a bad job.
All right. Quick thought on that, Guy. Let's start with you. Was Lester Holt in any way tipping the scales?
I think so. I think it's sort of a side note to the debate. This was all about the two candidates. Holt basically did a good job letting them talk to each other most of the time. But if you look at the questions that he asked, directed specifically or pretty clearly at one of the candidates, he came after him harder on the birth certificate stuff, on tax returns, on his statements about the Iraq War, his comment about Hillary Clinton and the presidential look. Those were all challenging, sort of barbed questions at him. There was nothing like that for Hillary Clinton. Now, he could have parried some of those into attacks with a pivot and gone into her. He made the decision not to, or didn't have the wherewithal to do it. But I think there's some criticism for Lester Holt that's legitimate.
The computer is about to take over. Jessica, I owe you the last answer next time. Appreciate you both being here. Jessica Ehrlich, Guy Benson. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, Hillary Clinton is back on the campaign trail, holding a rally in North Carolina in just a few hours. And this battleground state has become extremely competitive in recent weeks. The Real Clear Politics average of the polls has Trump leading by less than 1 point in North Carolina. But the latest Fox News poll from the Tar Heel state has Trump up by 5 points. He's at 45 to Clinton's 40%. John Dinan is professor of politics at Wake Forest University in North Carolina. Professor, it's great to have you on the program. We know the polls only tell us so much. What is the feeling in the state? How would you describe it to those of us on the outside?
Well, the feeling is it seems as razor thin as the polls are showing, and that's not to be surprised because North Carolina has been razor thin in the last 2 presidential elections. In fact, you could make the argument that North Carolina has been as evenly balanced in the 2008 and 2012 presidential election as any other state in the country. This year, no surprise, and the candidates are visiting very frequently.
Professor, are you watching a single issue that could tip the balance in either direction?
Well, both candidates have their issues. Donald Trump has really been playing the trade card, the argument about bad trade deals. You heard that at last night's debate. He's been emphasizing that in his appearances here. Hillary Clinton has been playing up her readiness to be president, her experience, her steady hand, just like she played that up in the debate last night. At her appearances in North Carolina, that's been her main card.
How much do you think the story out of Charlotte, North Carolina, will impact the election?
Well, it certainly attracted the full attention of North Carolina for the last week and continues to do so. And you see both candidates addressing it in various ways. Certainly questions of community police relations come up. Certainly Donald Trump played to that with his saying, I will be the law and order candidate. So that was his way of framing the debate. Hillary Clinton had a somewhat different way of framing the question. There's no doubt that that's front and center for North Carolinians this week and going forward.
It's worth mentioning that Charlotte hosted the Democratic National Convention in 2012. Mitt Romney ended up winning that state, but Barack Obama had done in 2008. When we were watching the campaigning, the schedule, it's interesting to note that the president joined Hillary Clinton on their first joint appearance in North Carolina. Do you see President Obama as being a factor for the Clinton campaign within your state and perhaps being something that draws Democrats out to vote in favor of Clinton?
It's very likely that that will be a key factor. Hillary Clinton's main goal in North Carolina is to bring up and keep intact the Obama coalition. African-American voters, younger voters, university towns. She's trying to do that on her own, but polls have shown that she's had some difficulties in that. The more that she can get help from President Obama, who originally held that coalition together, the better she'll be.
Just a fun fact for our viewers, President Obama won North Carolina by 0.3 percentage points in 2008, making him the first Democrat to win in North Carolina since 1976. So just some context for us. Professor, great to have you on the program. Thank you so much.
Good to be here.
It's what you call a squeaker. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton both in the media spotlight for decades, but there's still an awful lot we don't know about both of them. How their pasts shaped them, what really drives them today. Now, a fascinating documentary gives us a look. We'll talk live to the director next.
Her father was abusive verbally and dismissive when her mother and father would have this tense, demeaning discussions, and Hillary would run to her room and put her hands over her ears.
That's when her whole penchant for secrecy and privacy began.
But Donald's father was tough and insisted everyone learn the family business. Fred was seen as passionate about the business, but not warm with his children. Life was a competition. There were winners and there were losers.
How did Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton get to be the people they are? That's a, pardon me, a snippet of The Choice 2016. Fascinating documentary about the presidential nominees this time around. It's something PBS Frontline's been producing during each presidential election since 1988. But it was a new challenge this year because Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump have been media fixtures for decades. The Choice 2016 debuts tonight on your PBS station. Its director, Michael Kirk, joins us now. Michael, how long have you been working on this?
Yeah, we started sometime in March, April, when Trump finally prevailed. In July, we started shooting the Trump story, but we'd researched for almost a year. So it was 50 interviews I did across both of the campaigns, and it took us 5 or 6 months.
I've watched some excerpts, and it's fascinating to me. You think you know these people because they've been on the public stage for decades, both of them, and you found an awful lot of new information. Let's talk about Hillary Clinton's father. You know, she mentioned him last night, talked about his time in a, curtain factory and what a great role model he was. But there's more to that story.
I think he was very tough on and demanding on Hillary. When she would come home from school with A's, he would say it must be a terrible school. He was also very hard and dismissive of her mother. Her mother had a terrible backstory. She'd been basically rejected by her 16-year-old parents. She'd kept it a secret from Hillary, there's that word, secret, for decades. Poured all of her ambition into Hillary, realizing that she was under the gun from Hillary's dad. It was really a much more intense family background than the one Hillary talked about last night.
Hillary Clinton came to public life when she entered politics with her newly elected governor husband in Arkansas in 1979. I want to play viewers just a smidgen of tonight's documentary.
In Little Rock, the new First Lady, Hillary Rodham, was a curiosity. But Hillary's approach to her new role was seen as unconventional. She kept her maiden name and had her own career as a corporate lawyer.
She didn't want women to be accessories to their husband, and that is usually what a political wife is an accessory to her husband, and it didn't fit well.
So it was a rocky entrance for Hillary, and Bill Clinton was defeated after his first two-year term.
She dives right in. She takes over his campaign. She works with Dick Morris and becomes a real, Morris tells us, a real tough person inside all of that. She also does something personal. She loses those thick glasses. She gets her hair straightened and dyed. She changes her clothes, and most importantly, she changes her name from Hillary Rodham to Hillary Rodham Clinton. It's a way of sort of demonstrating Hillary's capacity for means and end kind of politics, which she's very good at.
President Obama may be a big part of the reason Donald Trump is running. We'll get into that with you in just a second. A lot more happening now coming up next hour. Outnumbered starts right now.